24 hours
Well,
a day.
Against the U.S. occupation in Iraq, but he's also very much for democracy and peace. And so he's he sort of embodied, for me as a filmmaker, embodied this sort of tragedy and the contradictions of this war. And what I mean by that is that, here's a war. This is really a war that America chose to enter into, and so you have this preemptive, unilateral, decision to invade a country, which is an act of aggression, and yet we're talking about bringing democracy and freedom. And so how do those two things get uttered in the same sentence, and what happens when you try to put them together? And so I was, as a filmmaker, and let me step back in terms of why Iraq. This is definitely a film that's all about, America post 9/11, and just feeling that the times that we're living in are times that are going to be determining a future for generations. And as a documentary filmmaker, I feel it's my job to make a record and to say something about these times. And so that was really what motivated me to do this, and I think also a profound sense of despair about the war. And so then I went there, and I went to Iraq, and I had one idea going in, and as films do, they tend to change, but I didn't I didn't know Dr. Riyad before I went to Iraq. I met him at Abu Ghraib prison, where he was doing an inspection of the prison, and it was right after the photographs were published worldwide, and as we know, sort of the weight of what those images meant. And he was there as a doctor, as an Iraqi doctor, to talk to detainees, and there were thousands of detainees at the time. And I had gotten permission to film it, and I introduced myself, and by the end of the day, I had a pretty good sense that he would become the focus of the film.
And for those of you that don't know, Dr. Riyad is the main character of the film in that he was also a nominee on the ballot during the vote.
Yeah, he decided he decides to run for election, and so the story follows. And he's a Sunni, and which is the party he's a member of is really very key, because everyone believes that to sort of curb the violence, you really need Sunni participation in the political process. So he was in this party that wanted to participate, but ultimately ended up boycotting the elections. But the drama follows. What does he do? Because he believes that's a mistake. And so what is the decision he makes as a candidate when his party boycotts, and sort of follows that drama?
Dr. Riyad is a doctor in the Adhani Free Medical Clinic in Baghdad, and all of this leading up, it was almost kind of surreal, actually, Laura. Watching his family, it's like, and the interaction about not even just the family, but the different scenes when he had his friend and his son had been kidnapped.
Right.
It was as if it was just an everyday event there.
Right. Yeah. The film focuses on this one family, and during the time I was there, they experienced more tragedy in those 8 months than most Americans experience in their life. Their cousin, and his nephew is kidnapped at gunpoint, is held hostage, and I filmed this whole ransom negotiation, and they're all very, very worried. But again, it's also something that people deal with.
Exactly. That was the surreal part of it, was that it was very commonplace. It was like, okay, let's have dinner and let's see if we can free this nephew.
Right.
That's how ordinary the scene seemed. It almost was frightening to me.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I probably, I can't even fathom the events of something so catastrophic happening in my life. And here this family is just, talking about the assassination of the attempted assassination in the beginning of the film of, I think it was the Minister of Welfare.
Yeah.
Talking about listening to the bombs going off, and eating their dinner.
And their mosque is raided. They went to pray on Friday, and their mosque is raided by special
forces. This is just one of those. It wasn't just one event. It was like this constant daily event after event after event that this family was experiencing.
Yeah, and what was amazing for me, I think, was, the day after the boys kidnapped, and then it's like election day, and they have to make this decision whether or not to risk their lives and vote or not, and you think, wow, like Americans, I mean, if we don't vote when it rains, and they're trying to figure out whether or not to vote when they're going to get blown up, and I'm thinking, like, who's bringing democracy to who, I mean, with taking this kind of courage, I mean, it's really extraordinary. I mean, I've said many, many times that it's a film that's really motivated by a sense of despair, but, the journey of making the film, I witnessed such incredible humanity and courage that
I mean, that's something, Laura. The events surrounding the election in Iraq, here in the United States, we had this incredibly, wonderful scenario that was presented to us in the media of all of this excitement and how everybody was just bouncing around off the walls in their agitation and excitement, running to get to the polls. Now, was it like that?
I mean, I think if I had been sitting, in New York watching the elections, I would have viewed it with a tremendous amount of cynicism and, well, what does this really mean? Because I think it means something different for us than, because I think for us it was about George Bush and, sort of validating the war.
He wanted the election.
Yeah, and validating the war. And I think, unfortunately, too much of this war has been discussed and debated about what is good or not good for Americans, where, meanwhile, Iraqis are dying in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands now. And so, being there, what I witnessed was, like this, desire for self-determination, and what people are willing to risk to do that, and so it's very genuine. They're not doing it for our public opinion or to make George Bush look better or worse. They're going there because they're voting or not voting because they want to participate in their own future, and that's something that everybody wants. And so to sort of witness like that day, so it was election day was one of those days where it's sort of like a zeitgeist. Something happens where people do things that catches some sort of critical mass, and people weren't planning on voting. But then the neighbor goes down, and then so and so tells so and so, and then they go out.
Infectious.
Yeah, it becomes that way. But what sadly is that elections aren't democracy, and still there hasn't, unfortunately, Iraq is still without a functioning state, and despite the fact that it's, the population.
Well, do you think the people of Iraq, in retrospect, looking back now at the days when they were infected by this desire to go and vote and create this democratic society and government that they had wanted, do you think they're disappointed now?
I think they are, I think they're disappointed in their leaders, as they should be. I mean, it reminds me sort of when the Berlin Wall came down. I mean, everyone was so excited, and then, I think a lot of people then realized, okay, well, it isn't utopia here. But I think people are very disappointed in their leaders there. But I think that, unfortunately, the decks were really have been stacked against Iraq since the early mistakes of this war, I'm talking the first 3 months, where the state was really decimated, where you didn't have law and order, and there hasn't been legitimate government for 4 years now, legitimate law and order. I mean, it has an occupation, it has the U.S. who's trying to hold things together, and then you have the security forces, which are perceived widely as being very sectarian, and not trusted by, so I feel that there are so many things that were so doomed, before.
One of the things that I noticed, and I couldn't help but watch throughout the movie, throughout the documentary and the film, was Dr. Riad seemed to have such weight on his shoulders, and as he walked through and interviewed from Abu Ghraib, as well as the people in the hospitals that he was trying to help, but with so limited resources, it almost seems like he had a weight on his shoulders. What of the children? It was like he just threw up his hands. What do you want? We have a puppet government. We have we have an occupying force. What do you want me to tell you?
Right.
It was like he was angry at them.
Yeah. I mean, he definitely was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and never resting. I mean, always, going out. I mean, a great risk. I mean, he had death threats, and it was it's every night he came home alive, it was a miracle. And sadly, the family has had to flee, as with sort of massive refugees because of death threats. So they're currently outside of the country, and that's sad because he never left. I mean, he never left under Saddam when things were bad. He was, if you're losing people like this, I don't know who's there to hold the country together. Where are the people? And
if your safety, how safe and secure did you feel?
I mean, I felt really compelled to make this film, and I was willing to take the risks that were involved, and the risks were, were pretty huge. I mean, I knew that I might not be coming back. I mean,
how did that make you feel, and how frightened were you during this entire episode?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually just talked to a reporter who's doing a story just on this idea, and what I said to him was that I believed in the film, and that belief is really pretty powerful, and it can be, that can be used in good ways or bad ways or stupid ways or whatever. But I really believed in the importance of documenting this history, and I think that kind of was stronger than the fear that also went into working there. And then once I, came to meet Dr. Riad, and I mean, he was losing friends left and right, assassinated. Like, this would be like your journalist friends turning up dead. I mean, we're talking all the time. We're talking on a monthly basis, a weekly basis. Somebody calls and says, your friend so-and-so was just shot dead on their way to work. And he was telling me these stories like this all the time, and I guess I felt that if he can, like, this, he didn't ask for this war. I mean, this is a war, we brought this war to Iraqis, and Iraqis are bearing the brunt of it in terms of the violence. And so if he can go out and take these risks, then I certainly can as an American who, and I had the option to leave at different points. I wasn't confined to be there, like most Iraqis are. And when I saw that, I just, what can you do? I mean, if he has the courage and the will to continue to do the work that he's doing, then I'll film him.
Talk to us about Abu Ghraib, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, Abu Ghraib, I was there, it was 3 months after the torture photographs were public in the news. So what had happened is I was preparing to go to Iraq, and that's when the photographs broke. And it was so, this sense of like, oh my God, I mean, that week, I mean, it was, they just kept coming out, and one was worse than the next. And then I was on my way, like, arranged to go to Baghdad. And as I got there, then somebody had told me, someone from the military said that there was going to be an inspection, and they said they offered to help facilitate me getting access. And so I got access to film this inspection, and the inspection was being conducted by a group of Iraqis, and it was being led by Dr. Riad. And when I was there, there were probably 2,500 detainees at the time, and you had a situation where there had been, people who had been there for over a year with no charges, because we couldn't process them. I mean, the U.S., we went in, we picked up lots of people, we put them in prisons, detention camps, but we didn't have any, translators, anything, so they were there for over a year with no charges.
Yeah, I think one of them was there for 13 months and not been, and the charges had been brought. He hadn't been there were no indictments, no criminal proceedings, no anything.
Yeah, and I'm like, we came to bring democracy? Like, what's going, like, something is really crazy here. And so I get there and I start filming, I introduce myself to Dr. Riad, and I start filming him. And the inspection went on for about 2 hours, and he talked to detainees, and he kept going to different camps, because it was sort of the prison's very big. And finally, from a tip from one of the detainees, they find this group of juveniles And then there's this scene that I'm filming where you have a group of kids, I mean, from 9 years old to 15, that are being held at Abu Ghraib prison. And the adult men, the Iraqis, are talking to them, and their looks on their faces, they can't quite imagine what's happening, why they're looking at children who are being held behind razor wire. And so they're talking to the U.S. military, and Dr. Riyad enters into this debate with this American, and so I'm, and it's in English, and he's trying to say why juveniles don't belong here, that they belong in a place for juveniles, they belong in a place where, they can be educated, and then you have the military guy who says, these kids are dangerous, and for me that was like embodied the film, because you have, this Iraqi trying to explain to this American military why
a 9-year-old should not be able to go to prison.
And he says, and it's actually a longer version, it's on DVD, but I had to cut it short on the film, but where he says, this is America. He's like, Dr. Riyad, he's like, this is the USA. This is not a Gulf state. This is the USA. You guys are trying to, stand up for this, this, and this. And you have a 9-year-old at Abu Ghraib prison, and it was extraordinary.
Unbelievable. It is extraordinary when you think about, and the conditions. You have to see the film. For those of you that have not seen the documentary, it's an amazing documentary, and it's beautifully done. There's almost a surrealness about the entire thing. Is this really happening? Is this what we've really done to this country? And obviously it is. You were there for, 8 months left?
Yeah, for 8 months, yeah.
And in these 8 months, we're talking about a daily path of tragedy and devastation and destruction and war. One of the things that, Laura, that I was fascinated by, usually we don't get to see the contractors, the private security contractors, as they're called.
Right.
And you can't call them anything else. The face of the American soldier, all stout and hardy and clean cut, and then you've got the contractors. Talk to us about the contractors.
The contractors, they're like what I think of as the wild card. I was filming the election story. I was following Dr. Riyad in the military, and then I was just introduced to these contractors, and they're Australian private security that were being hired through the Election Commission of Iraq to secure election materials. So in other words, they had to do convoys across the country to get ballots from here to there. And so it's this bizarre thing where you have something so, in a sense, non-militaristic as an election, it's being conducted as a military operation because it's so insecure and it was such a target. So this Australian contractors invited me to join them, and one of the scenes that's in the film, which is this gun deal. I had just met them. They invited me to come to the north of the country, and I filmed them that day. And then later that night, they were staying at this hotel in Erbil, and they said, listen, Pete needs to meet with an arms dealer. Can we do it in your hotel room? and then 5 minutes later, I'm filming this arms deal between them.
Tell me, that wasn't a little bit disturbing to you?
It wasn't just, as a filmmaker, are you kidding? It was how did I get so lucky? Where am I? I think I think there's karma involved in filmmaking. You suffer for a long time, and then miraculously you're filming arms deal, and then you suffer for a lot more time. And so it was, so you have this Australian buying AK-47s from this Kurdish arms dealer in my hotel room in Erbil. It was, it's one of my favorites.
And the fascinating thing is the Kurdish arms dealer that was selling the weaponry was certainly, he admitted that he was pro-American, but that he had very little hope or faith in the election process and in what was going to happen. As a matter of fact, he didn't even think there was going to be an election.
Yeah, it's actually, he wasn't the arms dealer. He was part of the Kurdish, he was subcontracting out some Kurdish Peshmerga, who are militia. And he was very, the Kurds are, I think at this point, the one of the groups, the only group left in Iraq that I think is still happy to see Americans there. But he's very pessimistic about about the show of the elections. He asks some very important questions. How can you have elections when you don't have security, when you don't have electricity, when you don't have water, when you don't have fuel? And so he sort of posed.
And he's talking about better dad at that point.
Yeah.
He's not talking about some of the, the beaten path, or Ramadi or Fallujah or anything like that. We're talking about Baghdad.
Right.
None of these things exist there.
Yeah. I mean, you see in the film there are a lot of scenes that are, by candlelight because there isn't electricity. I mean,
How did you survive this?
It was tough. I mean, it's I got good at charging batteries ahead of time, because the electricity would be on for a little while and then it'd be off. But it's 130 degrees in the summer, and you don't have a fan or an AC. I mean, it's really tough. It's really tough.
And these people live there all the time like that, under most horrific of circumstances, never knowing when a bomb is going to go off, never knowing when you're going to get that phone call that your nephew has been kidnapped or I have, my son-in-law is Iraqi, and he has family in Baghdad. And one of their friends came back the other day, and she was very devastated, and she was talking about how a lot of the children are being pulled from school. Parents are taking their children out of school because there's absolutely no security, and these children are being kidnapped.
Yeah.
And so they'd rather, and the choice is, do we have our children uneducated and alive, or educated and dead?
That's just so tragic. I mean, the level of that kind of criminal violence is not something we're hearing about. I mean, anyone who's a professional, their kids they're getting kidnapped for ransoms, for huge ransoms, and it's just vicious, criminality that really has to do with the fact that there hasn't been a state. Imagine New York, Chicago, any major city without a functioning government. I mean, we would have chaos here.
Well, exactly. Everybody says, they're barbarians, they're animals, they're killing each other. And I think to myself, gosh, we can't even keep our kids in on a Saturday night if we ground them. Can you possibly imagine, putting the burden of occupation, of curfews, of no electricity, no schools, no this, no that, no functioning government, no police? It would be anarchy in moments.
Yeah,
I can imagine for 1 minute our life not being disrupted like that. Yet we have the audacity to call them barbarians. We've gone and we've done this to them, and they're the barbarians.
No, I agree.
And there was this one part when the women were sitting in the living room of Dr. Riyad's home, and they were discussing, I think it was the mosque event, and they were saying it wasn't the insurgents, it wasn't Iraqis, it was Americans that were shooting them.
Yeah. I mean, they were praying. I mean, they were praying at probably the most one of the most renowned Sunni mosques, not in Iraq but in the world, at Abu Hanifa Mosque, that's known for the Sunnis all over the world. And the U.S. and Iraqi special forces decided to raid it with guns during Friday prayer, and I think it was during Ramadan. I mean, the timing can't be any worse because they were looking for potential guns, which they never found. But 4 people were killed in the ensuing, violence. And so you're thinking, like, who is thinking, like, we're going to raid a mosque during Friday prayer when you have women and children praying during Ramadan? I mean, it's really...
I wonder what the purpose is that. I mean, obviously they must have had some kind of purpose. Yeah. I'm sure they were all terrorists and all insurgents and all waiting around for...
I mean, I just think that there's a sense of just... I think that it's just such a massive story of lack of any kind of planning, and that is, I mean, which makes it more tragic almost, because you have people, there's just sort of this loss of life that seems so...
Do you think it's possible to withdraw from Iraq?
Is it possible what?
To withdraw from Iraq?
Everyone always asks me that, and the analogy that I use, it's like if you were driving down the street and you hit someone with your car, and they're lying on the ground, hurt and bleeding. I don't think that driving away is really dealing with your responsibility that this person is hit and lying there. But I also don't think the idea is to hit them again with your car, because that clearly didn't help them the first time. So I think you need help. I mean, I think we need to reach out to international community, Americans need to admit a certain responsibility to the situation, and but I don't think ongoing military occupation will ever bring stability to Iraq. I do think that there needs to be a way to fill the power vacuum that has been created, and that we can't just leave that power vacuum, because I think that the bloodshed would be really just unimaginable. And so the question is are there ways to fill the power vacuum that's not U.S. military occupation? Because that's just absolutely a magnet for violence across the region. People are coming to Iraq to fight America, and Iraqis are dying because of it. And so I think there has to be a really radical shift of policy. But I think that we have to, the country, continue to provide financial resources.
Well, I guess that otherwise, what good would the Geneva Convention if we don't even do reparations? But I don't think that's we're at a point of reparations right now. Yeah. We're going to be taking a break right now. This is the People Speak radio show, and our guest today is an Academy Award nominee, Laura Poitras. Her film, My Country, was nominated for the Academy Awards this year. Amazing job. We're very proud of you, Laura, and it's wonderful having you here. We're going to be back in just a couple of minutes to take some questions from our audience, guys. Get ready with your questions.
James Arthur Yanchik, the Black Knight of Talk Radio, inviting you to join me on a road to truth via the path of non-contradiction. Join us each week on Feet to the Fire, a show with the goals of examining a subject matter on its own merits and test how it stands up to the many possibilities found in reality. All without pre-drawn conclusions found in personal bias. No left or right wings here. No pounding the pulpit of ego-driven my way or the highway attitudes. But there are no free passes given either. Answers to questions are important, but equally important is the reasons and methods used to find the answer. The lack of contradiction is the final judge here on Feet to the Fire. Sunday evenings. How do you listen? Fire. www.feet2fire.com for more information.
Why don't you do it, you? We all the things we know. Won't you stand up for truth? Won't you turn away too?
Get your dose of truth with the Truth Hurts radio show with your host Charles Giuliani, Mondays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. The Truth Hurts. Ignorance kills.
Why don't you do it, you?
Got questions? The library's got answers, and books and magazines and CDs and videos and web access and databases and all sorts of other resources at your library. In a world that's information rich, libraries are information smart. Find the right answer and a whole lot more at your library.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the People Speak Radio. We're here interviewing Laura Poitras, Academy Award nominee for My Country, the documentary about Iraq and the Iraqi elections. We are going to invite you to call on our toll-free number, 1-877-786-0562, or you can join us in our virtual auditorium here on Pal Talk and ask questions and interact with Laura. Welcome back.
Thank you.
I was asking Laura, was there anything that she really wanted to discuss during our break, and you said the refugee situation, Laura.
Yeah,
I mean, talk to us about that and what your feelings are and what the situation really is there.
Mm-hmm. The estimates are that there are about 4 million displaced people, and that's internally and outside of the country, so about 2 million outside and 2 million inside. And just to put that into perspective, this is like a fifth of the population. So we would be talking about 50 million displaced Americans if we were trying to, put it into the population of the U.S. And the neighboring countries, Jordan, Syria, can't take any more. I mean, they're bursting. And But the European countries and America have turned their back. I mean, America in 4 years since the war began has taken in less than 500 Iraqis and given them.
Wow. And it's amazing. I didn't realize that little. I mean, I knew that it wasn't much, but I didn't realize it was that little.
Less, and the country that is doing the most for Iraqis is Sweden, who've taken in 25,000. Now, somebody needs to explain to me why Sweden, which didn't begin this war and hasn't put troops in this war, it feels a responsibility to alleviate the suffering of refugees and displaced people, and America doesn't, so they've taken, and that's actually, Dr. Riyad right now is temporarily in Sweden because they would take him in, and but he's very, very eager to return to Baghdad. And it's just
amazing. And these people, the refugees that went, are they allowed to come back into Iraq at all?
The refugees that have left? Well, it's a very complicated, yes, I think that they're allowed to. But it's their movement, it's very hard for them to get visas to travel right now outside of the country because it's a bit of a complicated thing to describe, but all the passports were made invalid, Iraqi passports that were issued after a certain date. So if you don't have a passport that was issued in the last year or something, all of a sudden your passport no longer is valid in most European countries and the U.S. And so they're kind of trapped and have to, in order to renew their passports, are required to go back to Baghdad. So you have people who fled the country, who are now unable to move because their passports have been...
Because of red tape.
Yeah, because of red tape.
Well, we know that one. In Palestine, you can't leave the country, and you can't stay in the country if you have not a sovereign passport. It's an amazing thing. I mean, and yet we support this kind of.
Yeah, and I think that I'm not quite sure the numbers now, but it was 16 million that the U.S. has put towards refugees and working with the UN. And we're spending, what are the figures now, $2 billion a week? Or $2 billion every 2 weeks? Something like that. I mean, like phenomenal, astronomical amounts of money to support the war effort, and yet we're not helping the population that has now been, forced out of the country.
Fascinating. Just absolutely fascinating. For us to have caused such incredible havoc, such incredible devastation, such incredible mayhem in the lives of people that did nothing to this country. Just amazing. We have a couple of questions here. One of our questions is a text question. Some of our people in our virtual auditorium don't have mics, so we take questions in any way, shape, or form we can. And this is from Art from Pittsburgh. Would like to know, what do Iraqis think about Iranians since the war with Iran? Do they feel threatened by them or want their help?
I mean, I think it really depends on who you talk to answer that question. I think Dr. Riyad, I think what's happened is that since the war and since the country's kind of become an unstable environment, you're having all the major players in the region. So you have Iran, Saudi Arabia, everyone is sort of putting their forces of, direct or indirect, into the country. So I think that there's a lot of resentment across the board by the neighboring countries, vying for Iraq right now, which is not in a good situation. So I think that there's concern about that. But I also think that it is a situation of, it is a majority Shia country, and the government that was elected, were many of them living in exile in Iran, so they have close ties. I mean, it's a neighbor, and they have close ties. So that's not unexpected that there would be, close relationships between Iraq and Iran.
Which is an interesting question, given the fact that Iran is a predominantly Shia country, that instead of a Sunni government, a predominantly Shia government was actually put in power in Iraq. How is that going to play out in the end? I mean, you've got to understand that there's going to be some alliances there.
Right. It's very predictable. I mean, if you think too, I think that the joke is that, the real winner of this war is Iran. And but it was very predictable that this would be the outcome. It's just the majority Shia. If you have elections, that's what's going to happen. But I think the U.S. the idea of elections was not the initial idea of the administration. That was kind of Plan C. I mean, Plan A was we're going to put in the exiles that we like Chalabi and those folks, and that was quickly rejected. And then the second plan was, we're going to just put forward the people that we like, and and then you had Sistani who said, that's not going to happen, and he, filled the streets with protesters overnight. And then the U.S. realized, I guess we have to have elections, and unless we're going to have not only the Sunnis blowing us, shooting at us, but we're going to have the Shias also shooting at us, and so then this idea of doing the elections and one person, one vote was the decision, and so. But it's pretty predictable. I mean, what's actually so strange about, the whole war and the justification behind it is that here you had a country that was, as we know, was not a direct threat to us, but it was this was a country that was hated by Al-Qaeda and Islamic,
Exactly, as a matter of fact, the ideologies
a secular dictator.
Yeah, the ideologies of Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden were absolutely the antithesis of each other. There was an absolute distaste for each other and hatred for each other. And here they've been accused of being this, this incorporated part of Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, I mean, incredibly simplistic, and and now we've sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy because we've actually created exactly that. Because by going there, we've become a magnet for anyone who wants to sort of,
Well, we have another caller, and, absolutely simplistic was it. I have to just follow up on that briefly. It's almost frightening that we were willing, as American citizens, to accept such a simplistic reason for killing hundreds of thousands of people and sending our American soldiers to die in Iraq. That's pretty scary. Mystic Sea Maiden is calling in. Mystic, would you please come to the microphone where you're calling from? And a brief question for Laura, please.
Yeah, my name's Rima. I'm in Chicago. The question I want to ask is, it seems to be a lot of people there's a lot of empathy in the United States for the Iraqi people. How can you help put a face, make people realize the Iraqi people are people, to set it, to get it home to people that the Iraqis are other human beings that are being killed and tortured in this. And that's my question, and I want to thank you very much for the courage you have shown.
What I did with the film, that's the only, and which was, it was shown on public television, so it was seen by, I think 2 or 3 million Americans, and now nominated. It's available. Actually, today it was released on DVD, so it's on Netflix and all that kind of stuff. And exactly that was, my goal was to, I think, show the humanity of people, and so I think that's all you can do. But it's very, very hard when you have the press that just reports like body counts. These are people, and I think if you took one day of the New York Times, like say 50 people were killed in Baghdad today, if you actually were to do an investigation, it's like, who are those people and who was left behind? Who are those 50 people? Because I think, we did that when 9/11 happened. Everyone got their bios mentioned and who was lost. But Iraqis die, and I think that we very, very quickly do not, that their blood is cheaper than ours, sadly. And so I do think it's the role of the media to tell stories that so that when those people die, we're as saddened as when our people die, and that's the role, I think, of media.
Well, I think, Laura, too, you're not really talking up your film, because in fact, that's exactly what this film does. It gave Iraqis a face, it gave them a family, it gave them a redeemer, someone that was in the healing field, someone that was dealing with not only healing but suffering, the kidnapping of his own nephew, the killing of his friends. I mean, this whole film, My Country, was the face of an Iraqi family, and it humanized them. And I think it was a brilliant job.
Yeah, and I think we have to. I mean, I think it's sad that we actually do see the media coverage from there, the mainstream media coverage, and mostly television. It's actually often mostly about the Western journalist who goes there, as this sort of filter through which we can have empathy. And I don't think you need that filter. I mean, I think, that there are ways to tell stories and bring a message of humanity by just telling the stories.
We have another question here from Farouk from Queens in New York. Excuse me. People are saying American soldiers are involved in making brothels in Iraq, like in the Green Zone, and also exploiting Iraqi girls in American bases throughout Iraq. My question is, how many soldiers can she tell us that are involved, I'm assuming in this, and who are helping these girls and women, and who are helping these girls and women being exploited?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question, and unfortunately it's actually not one that I can probably answer with any authority. Actually, my experience was not, I didn't see a lot of that, and I felt it was very forbidden, as in contrast to, for instance, Vietnam, where we knew that was really widespread, that kind of, which isn't to say it's not happening. It probably is happening some, but I don't have enough, I don't have any evidence on it. And I do think that there was definitely a sense that there weren't those, that it was very off limits, extremely off limits.
Are you saying that it's off limits as far as the Iraqis are concerned, or
and the Americans, which isn't that there aren't relationships and that kind of stuff happening, but I didn't witness or hear anything about any brothels or nothing.
And if you didn't, you didn't. I mean, you can only talk about what you did witness, and what you did witness is very profound. And it's amazing that we're right. We're here and we're hearing these stories, and we're saying this is not war. On one hand, we're hearing stories of people like deserter Joshua Key talking about decapitating Iraqis with machine guns and then playing football with their heads. And then here we're saying, well, the Iraqis love us, and you almost don't want to believe. You want to believe that the Iraqis love us, but I don't think that's really the case anymore. Our next question is from Peace Lover, and Peace Lover, will you come to the mic, your name, and where you're calling from, please?
Thank you. Hello, Laura. Thank you for being on the show. Laura, my name is Mike from California. And my question is, I've actually seen the film. And I have a question for you about is there anything that happened in the aftermath of the film where you, I understand you were put on the Homeland Security list. Could you talk about that? Thank you.
Yeah. And had no problems filming and nobody ever asked me what I was doing, what I was filming, no one asked to look at any footage, and I'm including the U.S. military here. I had no hassles, but since I finished the film this summer, I've had a lot of problems traveling, and so I was traveling internationally, showing it at film festivals, and on my way home from Sarajevo, I went to Vienna and was paged to the gate and taken to a police area where I learned that I was on that I had a very high threat score. That I basically what I have is a CIA file, and I'm considered a threat to the U.S. The Homeland Security considers me to be a threat, and that I have a high threat score. So what happens is that every time I travel internationally, when I come back to the country, sometimes they'll do passport inspection as we exit the plane, so that customs people can find me before I even enter into the terminal, and then they pull me aside and have to call Homeland Security and then search my bags. So this happens every time I travel. And it's a little bit, so it's annoying. I actually just came back from London and had to go through the whole thing again. And and I joke about it. I mean, I always bring DVDs and tell them that and then this time I told them it was like nominated for an Oscar, and they'd actually heard about it. And
yeah, I was just going to say, you would think that would offer you a little bit of anonymity, immunity at some point.
Right, but just sort of in defense of sort of both the Border Patrol people and our U.S. military. I mean, the people they think it's pretty absurd that they're actually searching me, and searching through my stuff and getting all nervous when I come in, but I think these are decisions that have been made by the administration, and they're sort of trying to follow them. And in terms of the U.S. military in Iraq, I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't take much to really poison the well, and we've done enough to poison it, so that it's really toxic at this point. And so you have very aggressive, checkpoints and killing of civilians, etc., that we all know that have been documented. At the same time, I think there are some people who are, really trying to do the right thing and are being put in absolutely impossible circumstances, and they know it. And I think the military, as a group, they're incredibly pessimistic about this war and angry that they've been put in the position of trying to clean up a horrendous policy.
In many of our interviews, and we've interviewed Iraqi veterans against the war and and writers and things like that, and I think that's one of the things. And plus, in our daily life, talking to vets that we see, and I never miss an opportunity to speak to one of our veterans. And or our soldiers that are currently in the military. And this is one thing that I've always found there, is that they are not happy to be there, and they don't really know. Right. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, we don't really know why we're there. Right. And how they talk there about not knowing why they're there.
Right. I mean, U.S. military, they're not trained to be nation builders. I mean, we're going there to change the Middle East with people who don't speak the language. And we're asking people to do this, and by the way, you're going to get shot at. And they're being, trying to do this kind of, policing that we're asking them to do is making them so vulnerable, to be killed. And it's such a horrible predicament. And, our State Department, which is actually the people who are, trained to do this kind of stuff, they won't even take the risk to go out and talk to civilians. So it's the military that are being sent out to do all this work because they're the people who somehow we deem can die in this war, and where the rest of us, don't take no sacrifice.
Amazing. Now, our armchair warriors in Washington, isn't it wonderful? We have another question. Derry, will you come to the mic? Give us your name, where you're calling from, and your question for Laura, please.
Thank you, Basma. Hi, Laura. Thank you for being here tonight. My question, what I'm wondering is, while you were filming in Iraq, did you have any restrictions put on you as to areas you could go to or not go to? Were you allowed to pretty much go where you wanted to go, or were there areas that they prevented you from going to? Thank you.
I have a chance to see I could get around quite a bit, and it's one of those things when you're in a chaotic, failed, security state. You actually you can actually do quite a bit. Whereas I think in places that have a bit more of a functioning government, you wouldn't be able to. But I had no restrictions placed on me, and I mean that from across the board, from from Iraqis or to the U.S. And so I really was able to film everything that I tried to film.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, let me ask you something. Did you identify with any of the soldiers while you were there, Laura? I mean, did you really get close to some of them?
There were some that I really did, that I consider to be friends. There were people who put their career on the line to sort of give me cover, to either give me tips or to give me cover, and there was one person who I just, I know that if something had happened to me, that would have been the end of his career, because he was a colonel, and he gave me a certain type, a kind of a cover, and I know that if something had happened, it would have, it would have gotten around, and his career would have been over.
Many times here in the United States, I think we want to believe that somehow our soldiers are these blind soldiers and deaf and mute, and as a matter of fact, we encourage them to be that, because they're going to go there to kill or be killed, potentially. And in a war that's escalating in its violence, escalating in the death toll, here in Michigan we have 105 soldiers that have already been killed, 112 I think, 112 soldiers that have been killed, and this death toll is growing and growing daily. And yet we think that somehow they're detached from this somehow, and I guess they have to be, but I don't think they're blind, deaf, or dumb. We have 2 more questions we are going to try to get in. No Political Animal. Could you come to the mic, give us your name, a brief question for Laura, and where you're calling from, please.
Hello, my name is Joanne. I'm calling from Toronto, in Canada. Laura, I'm wondering how you respond to other Americans who are now labeling you anti-American for comments that have been made about how the Americans are operating in Iraq. I'm not obviously American myself, but those of us who aren't, we also get called that as well. But it must be much worse for somebody who's actually an American trying to help. What would your answer be to that? How would you answer to those people?
I don't have that many people actually calling me anti-American outside of Homeland Security, which I don't know because it's all classified, so I don't know what they're calling me. Someday I'd like to actually see the file, but my experience is that the film has really been embraced across the board, the spectrum, and that includes, actually I did a training at a U.S. military base for it was a high-level sort of war college where they wanted to, they're using it to understand culture and in terms of what they're doing wrong in Iraq. And so they had 600, U.S. majors in the Air Force looking at the film and trying to engage with the issues in the film. So, and they sort of joked about the fact that I was also on a watch list, and the contradictions and the ironies of that. So I don't really feel a burden that people are labeling me anti-American.
Well, we have another question, and we're going to be wrapping it up real soon. So I'd like to get one of our Pal Talk admins here, Reg Avalon. Will you please come to the mic? I think you can undot yourself and ask your question of Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, I think I've already been undotted. What consistently troubles me is that we don't understand the disparity between Eastern and Western thought, by which I mean the separation of church/religion and state. Now, for example, in America, England, Australia, they are separated by constitution, but I don't think people understand that it is combined in Middle Eastern countries, including, of course, Iraq. And that is what we Westerners need to get our heads around.
No, I think it's a really good point to make. If you see in the film, it's actually been seen very early on where Dr. Riyad says, America, the secularism hasn't brought justice, and that the only thing that can bring justice is religion. And he really believes that. I mean, this is really his belief, and there is no real separation. And I think it's something that, that American and the world needs to understand about the Middle East and Islamic countries, and so I think it's very important. I think another thing that we fail to also understand is this idea of historical memory, because I think America sort of deals with its foreign policy like 1 month at a time, and doesn't draw connections between the Afghanistan in the 70s and now, and yet the rest of the world remembers those kinds of things. like if you fund these people and you abandon them, then you might, something might happen later. Like that there are repercussions, and that history is seen in a much longer view by the rest of the world than it is by
the rest of the world. And that's very interesting that you should mention that, this unholistic way of looking at things. It's like going to the kidney specialist. You're only dealing with the kidney, but you have nothing attached to that kidney. And it's the same thing here. What happened in Afghanistan or what happened a month ago has nothing to do with what's happening today. Yet it does. It has everything to do with it.
Yeah.
Just amazing. Our time is up. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I definitely want to thank you, Laura. Congratulations. If you haven't had the opportunity to watch this film, the film is called My Country, My Country by Laura Poitras. You can get it. It's just been released, so congratulations. Next week, our guest is going to be the famous Anne Rice. The vampire woman herself is going to be here. So we're very thrilled to have her, and I think it's going to be a fantastic follow-up. Laura, thank you so much for being here. You're just wonderful, and congratulations on your nomination. Congratulations on a piece of film history that is very, very important. And I personally want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Great having you. Okay, folks, this is it. Good night. See you next week.
One bright sunny morning, in the shadow of the steeple, by the lily fast, I saw my people, and they stood there hungry, and I stood there wondering, if this land was made for you and me. This land is yours. This land is mine, from California to the New York Island, redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. Yeah, this land was made for you and me.